episode number 140 of the LSR podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry. With me, I have Dustin Gowker. I have Adam Candy. You can follow them on the Twitter machine for free, and you should at Adam Candy, 2 E's, no Y, at Dustin Gowker. If you hate yourself, you can follow me at Matt Brown M2. We will talk what's going on with gambling ads on television. What are we going to see over the next few days here for March Madness? We'll talk about what's going on with 365 in Ontario, some New York stuff as well. We'll get Adam's state roundup. We're going to talk about a little bit about this Calvin Ridley stuff as well. But let's go ahead and kick things off here on a piece that Brad wrote, Adam, over on the site, just kind of looking at, hey, look, we're taking money from, and every network at this point is taking money from various sports books out there. Yet whenever we're listening to the game and our favorite announcing team, whatever that might be, goes to talk about, something that might be important for people that were betting the game, they have to kind of tiptoe around it and phrase things kind of cutely and maybe just really, dodge, even say that they're kind of dodging what they're trying to say. Why is that?
What's interesting to me, Matt, and the sort of genesis of this article was Brad and I looking at all of these partnerships and saying to each other, why is it that there's so much money flowing through and yet there are so few broadcasters who are willing to talk about it? Is it just a lack of education? Is it pressure from the leagues not to do this? What is really behind the sort of reticence that we see from most broadcast networks when we know NBC and PointsBet, CBS and William Hill, right? We know that ESPN is dipping its toes into the water, so that includes ABC. And think about the broadcasters that we see on a regular basis who are willing to talk about this. Scott Van Pelt, Brent Musburger, Al Michaels, sort of an older guard of guys who have been hinting at it for a long time, but haven't really been able to talk about it as openly as at least you would think they have the ability to do now. So in Brad's research, what he found in talking to some folks who were versed in the industry is that the view of gambling is that it is still a very niche audience among sports. That when you talk about a Monday Night Football broadcast, that you're talking about folks who only a very small segment of them are interested in gambling talk. And I guess that's really tough to measure, isn't it? I feel like that's not necessarily the case, but it is the safer play for networks to sort of slow roll into having sports betting talk, in addition to the mass of sports betting ads that we see on most of NFL broadcasts and now NBA, Major League Baseball, etc. The notable exception, and part of the reason we're talking about this today, is the NCAA, which announced, I'm going to say laughably, that they were not going to air any ads for sportsbooks during March Madness. Wink, wink. There's not any betting going on. Wink, wink. Yeah. But hey, come play our free-to-play bracket game.
Yeah, only the biggest gambling event there is on the sports calendar. Whenever you start from the opening tip to the end championship game, only bigger than the Super Bowl. Yeah, no big deal.
It literally would not be something. I mean, it would still be big, I think, but it's an office pool event. Like, there are people who won't watch a lick of college basketball the rest of the year that will fill out a bracket and plop a few dollars on it. And we can call that gambling or not. It's gambling. Yeah. It's, even though it's not gambling at a regulated sports book, but and I noted that I went to the NCAA site, looked at their bracket page, and it says don't bet on it. Even as the NCAA knows this is a betting product. Like, it's definitely ostrich head in the sand stuff for the NCAA still. Like, fine, don't have ads on your actual broadcast, but this is a gambling product. It is almost more of a gambling product than an actual sporting event, which is not really the case in anything else. Like, this has gotten big because of, I'd say, the gambling that happens on it, both regulated and via office pools.
And Adam, like, we should at least mention that there have been at least some attempts at this, but it would be a separate product, not the main product, where a network such as ESPN, which has the broadcast rights to basically everything on planet Earth, they have run, ESPN2 simultaneously with whatever's going on ESPN. Our buddies, Doug Kazarian, Joe Fortenbaugh, have done, betting broadcasts for actual game feeds and things like that. So it's not like it hasn't happened in an ulterior form. It just is not really, laced into the main broadcast.
Right, and that's what we've seen the efforts be up until this point, Matt. We have in the article talk from NBC Sports Philadelphia of them having done alternate broadcast for 76ers games, where they talk more about the betting angles to it. And I think part of what we get into is this fear that the broadcast is going to devolve into a bunch of numbers that people don't understand. And I think that's where the education piece comes into this, right? I was on a different broadcast yesterday. We had Dallin Cuff from ESPN on, and if I could take Dallin Cuff's perspective on this and bring it out to the larger audience, he would be my guy to talk about it, because he weaved the discussion of gambling into just our casual conversation about the NCAA tournament, about the NFL. He's someone in the ESPN family who has done the Daily Wager show that they're using as one of their entry points into gambling. It's about education. And Dallin Cuff said, if you are a broadcaster right now, anywhere in the sports world, and you are either scared by or down on education for sports gambling, you need to get on the train sooner than later, because the discussion of it, at the very least, isn't going anywhere in the next few years. And in fact, it's only going to get more.
And you know, look, if you guys have ever followed me, you know, look, I've done a television show that was based around sports betting that the network tried to kind of work in and all that stuff, but it was a network that the rights at the time we weren't able to like do specific games and things like that. So we just kind of talk about things just in general with all of that. And it's very, very hard. And so it is, if you can find a way to just naturally do it into the normal broadcast, like you said, Adam, without it being just over the top, without you just beating people over the head with it, I think people have started to come around. I understand, I live in the bubble. If I feel like it's been here forever. But even talking to my friends who live in Louisiana, where it hasn't been legal for very long, right? I mean, they're talking about, you know, stuff from more of a spread angle, right? Like, you know, like they're talking about some of these games where the March Madness going on right now. They're talking about some of these games, not from a who do you think is going to win standpoint, but who do you think is going to cover standpoint, where that's never been the case in the 20 years that we've ever been on this text chain and things like that. So it is at least naturally starting to weave its way into the fabric of America as it is anyway. And like you said, if you can find people who can talently do that and make it where it doesn't feel like it's intrusive to the broadcast, then, you know, look, I think it adds more to stuff. I've been screaming for years that golf's biggest hangup was not talking the money aspect of golf. You know, like if this guy makes this putt, it's going to move him up into a tie for eighth, and that's worth $150,000 and stuff. You like people can like, oh wow, like make that putt worth something, the same way that a free throw could be worth something, or you know whatever a layup at the end that didn't matter that put the game over.
Well, Matt, I think there was a good quote in this article about where we could start to, I'm going to say, give a gateway into it. I think that's the best way to put it. And one of the experts Brad talked to suggested something that I know is not reinventing the wheel, but having an analytics expert on the broadcast and beginning the talk of percentages and odds and understanding odds in a way that have to do with the outcome of the game versus the outcome of a bet. The Sunday Night Football broadcast has kind of started to do this a little bit, where they show, hey, here's the chances that a team wins the game if they go for it on fourth down versus if they kick the field goal versus if they punt, right? It's the sort of thing that gets people used to the idea that you can boil sports down to numbers that you can understand. It doesn't all have to be walking into a sports book, seeing minus 350 and plus 300 and not understanding what any of that means. It can be that simple. It can be as simple as having a broadcast where you talk about, hey, so-and-so is the favorite to win MVP of the league this year, right? And you put a graphic up on the screen that just shows, here are the 5 favorites to win MVP of the league this year. And then you follow that narrative throughout a game where you have one that you did last week, Nikola Jokic against Joel Embiid in the NBA.
Yeah, and Dustin, it'll be fairly interesting to see what comes of the NFL and next season whenever the Thursday night games move to Amazon. Amazon obviously now being you're only going to be able to stream the games. It's going to be on the web. You would be just a click away, you know, like as you're watching the game, like from being able to go and place a bet or whatever, and how they end up trying to weave that, because they've been talking about, you know, how do they differentiate this broadcast? What can they do to make it different from everything else that's going on out there? And, you know, maybe embracing the gambling aspect just at least a little bit more could be a pathway for them.
We're going to see gambling get in the broadcast. It's going to be a slow rollout. I do understand why it's been slow to this point, because hammering people over the head with it right now seems like it might be too much. But I'm with you guys. Let's start seeing it a little bit instead of avoiding it.
So been following what's going on in Canada very closely here on the podcast over at LegalSportsReport.com as well. And Dustin, we are looking at one of the big companies that we've been talking about for a long time that looks like they're going to make a move up there.
Yeah, it feels like we're talking about Bet365 just about every week now about something. They are coming into Ontario. They just got a license from the Alcohol and Gaming Commission in Ontario. They are one of many gray market operators that have operated in Canada for a long time. This is not them serving Ontario will not be new to them. They have a great deal of penetration already in Ontario based on what they've already done in the province. So this is the interesting part of this, and this is where Canada and Ontario are different from the United States, where we have these gray market operators where we call it gray because it's definitely not illegal in any sense that anybody is enforcing it. There's it was obviously not regulated to in any way either. So this is the change. And here in the United States with the black market offshore operators, they are not. There's no argument, at least in my mind, that they were operating in the U.S. or continue to do in any kind of legal form. So, this is a path to bring this into the light, to bring all of the gray market into Ontario, realize tax revenue, give it the regulation. This is part of why Ontario did what it did. I don't think this is a path for some of those aforementioned black market operators to wash it, because you have to. There's still these lines of white, gray, and black. Like if you're serving the black market, if you're serving places where it's clearly illegal, I don't think you're getting in Ontario. But if you've been serving Ontario in the past as an unregulated operator, you have a path in here to get licensed, it seems like.
Adam, we talked about as New York was going live, and listen, the big tax rate, we were saying the limited amount of people that were going to be allowed in, et cetera, et cetera. We were saying, hey, look, let's not get too wrapped up in all the details right this second, because things can change. There might be a different way to look about this in a year, 2 years, whatever it might be, depending on how successful things are, or we know now successful, could have been unsuccessful, whatever it was, that things were at least out there, that things could not necessarily be set in stone. And so here we are, not that long into mobile legalization in New York, and we find a new bill that is trying to kind of massage this stuff a little bit.
I think massage is the right word, because overhaul would be too strong. We're looking at what's happening in New York, where we have 9 approved sports betting operators at a 51% tax rate. And can this continue to be a successful market at the level that it has been early? We are way, way too early to know the answer to that. But of course, too early in politics is never too early. So Assemblyman Pretlow, Senator Adabo, the two legislators who've been most behind the push to legalize both sports betting and mobile in New York, have introduced mirroring bills that would, by next year, up the number of sports books in New York to 14, and then by the following year, up it to 16. And when we initially looked at this, our Matthew Waters said, well, hold on a second. Does that apply to the original matrix that we saw out there with the request for proposals that went out? Would that then take the tax rate down in New York down to 35% or a lower number that we'd originally seen? And, in a way, we looked at it and said, okay, well, maybe this is sort of the trade-off that the market is going to look at. And let me clear my throat. Forget about it. No, that's not what's going to happen. Senator Adabo said, look, we're not going to do anything that is going to lower the tax rate. Those new sports books would come in at the 51% tax rate that was agreed upon by the other operators. And remember, if you're going to look at that tax rate and say, wow, that's high, keep 2 things in mind. One, Governor Cuomo, when he first pushed this through, strongly suggested 50% would be a threshold that needed to be crossed in order to be a successful bidder. And 2, the sportsbooks themselves bid this. Like, they are the ones who bid this tax rate, and so it's kind of hard for them to say, well, we need it to be changed, at least within a year or 2, because they're the ones who agreed to it.
Dustin, when we take a look, I mean, it's instantly the sports betting capital of the United States, likely the world, if you really want to look at it from that standpoint, is New York. And we see, okay, it could expand up to 16 books. If you are a book that wants to, play in the sandbox here in the United States, are you going to be able to sit out New York? Like, would you honestly be able to make that choice and not do it? Or do you see basically everyone that's not in at this point go ahead and take advantage of getting in that state?
I mean, if you're a bit player right now and you don't have a whole lot of money behind it, yeah. Well, I mean, maybe it's not attractive because of all of these factors. But I mean, you're right. If you're selling growth and you're like a Fanatics or I mean 365 or certainly Barstool Penn. Like I feel like you have to be in New York somehow. You have to eat it. You have to say, yeah, this sucks that we're in late. This sucks that we're still going to pay this tax rate. But I feel like maybe you have to eat it because you're just like, I mean, it's not maybe not embarrassing, but it's like it's a black mark if you're just not in New York at this point. You're not saying, oh well, we're not in the currently largest operating online betting market and we're just going to punt on it. Doesn't feel great. I mean, does it make a whole lot of sense? No, maybe not either. That's what we've talked about that for a long time, about the sustainability of all of this with the tax rate and all of this. But yeah, I don't know. It's a hard choice, I think, when if you're coming into it and saying, yeah, we're way behind. These existing operators have had a huge lead on us, and we don't get any benefit for coming in now. Like, it's a tough choice, and I wouldn't want to be the one to have to make it.
And Matt, just to put a bow on this, will there be 16 sportsbooks in 2024 trying to compete in the United States? I think that's the other reasonable question here, is that we might increase these licenses, and I'm not sure who's going to be around to pay multi-million-dollar license fees and 51% tax rate to try to play in that sandbox.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. For sure. If you guys have been following anything, you certainly heard about the Calvin Ridley deal, where he did place bets whenever he was away from the team. He was not on the field playing, but he was away from the team and did place some bets. He admitted to that. There's no questions about any of these things. Dustin, we do start, though, to sit down and take a look and say, like, okay, here's a case where a guy did something really stupid, but how do we go about trying to make sure that somebody else doesn't do something really stupid, or that multiple people haven't already done something really stupid, and we will find out about it over the course of the coming months or whatever it might be. There is an article over at Legal Sports Report where people are at least taking a look at that.
Yeah, and here's, again, this has been propped up as good for sports betting. And sure, great, we caught Calvin Ridley.
Right.
He's not supposed to be doing this. We caught him. But everybody involved wants this not to happen at all. We don't want to catch people on the back end. And like literally, sportsbooks, teams, the NFL, any league, anybody involved in the ecosystem wants nothing to do with a player getting caught after the fact. Like that's the part that's missing here, is that, yeah, great, we caught Calvin Ridley, but this should be stopping him before he does it, so that we don't have, you have to suspend a guy for a year for gambling on the sport, then you start having to answer these questions about integrity concerns. So so there's a lot of ways that right now there's no system in place. I think that's the point there. I mean, there are systems to catch a Calvin Ridley. Anything, as Brad outlines really well, from KYC, know your customer protocols, to anti-money laundering, traders, responsible gambling. You can catch somebody at any of these points. But there's no uniform way to do it or to ensure that it's not going to happen. So Brad posits a couple of different ways that have been kicked around in Europe and here, like either create a database of players. That's maybe a bit problematic, or have an agency, if somebody wants to create a sportsbook account, that they're limited on or banned from betting on the sport that they are supposed to be betting on, or what have you. The main takeaways here is this, especially at the early life cycle of the U.S., we don't want a bunch of other people being caught betting on sports in the leagues. None of the leagues want this. Ridley used a girlfriend's account apparently to do this, and we just got to find ways to stop this, because I don't think I'm being too crying wolf here by saying we get enough of these and people start scratching their heads like, what are we doing here if we get multiple? Again, we haven't had that. And we're also, I'm sure I said this last time, we're still in a world where these athletes are definitely betting offshore still too. There's no doubt about that. So I think it still does come down to education and making sure people realize this is not worth, upping your career or losing tens of millions of dollars like a Calvin Ridley did.
Right. Adam, this is one of those things where, I mean, we're talking over 20 years ago, right? I played collegiate athletics for a little while, and day one they sit you down and you sit down before they even tell you where the locker room is. You get a seminar on not gambling and staying away from gambling and all that. So the education has been there, at least in the on the collegiate level, 20 plus years since I was doing it. I don't have any firsthand experience, obviously, in a pro locker room and how that all goes down, but I can only imagine that it has been out there in these guys' faces as much as humanly possible. So, I mean, as far as an education standpoint, I don't know, man. Maybe I'm being naive. I don't really know that there's not much more that they can do. I think it just comes down to an individual choice. And at some point, because again, as Dustin alluded to, it should be enough of a motivation to not lose 7 to 8 figures alone to do something like this. But I mean, I understand there's some of these younger guys, some of the lower level players that don't make the type of money that Calvin Ridley does or whatever. But even still, you're making high 6 figures and stuff like that. I mean, that alone should be motivation, not killing your career. But I don't know if there's that much more education that can be done.
There isn't. There absolutely isn't. You just brought up a point that I alluded to last week. From the day you set foot on campus in college, this is drilled into you. I mentioned the fact that I know someone who used to work for the Rams who says that it was impossible to miss the messaging within their facility every single day on gambling. This is not about education at this point. The education has been exhaustive. I think what it's about is that it's not even Calvin Ridley being caught. It's about, we talk about mobile sports betting in the regulated environment being a positive for a number of reasons. KYC, know your customer, AML, anti-money laundering are a big part of that, right? And the concept behind those is that you are trying to make sure that people are not laundering money through a sports betting account. Hello, Action 24/7 in Tennessee. And you're also trying to make sure that you know your customer to make sure they don't have a criminal background, right? That no red flags are coming up in a background check. And I think that's the key here, is that if we can't talk about KYC in a way that says we can catch criminals, we can catch people who shouldn't be betting, how do we then say to everybody, okay, we couldn't catch a famous athlete who was in this. How are we going to catch someone else who shouldn't be betting? Now, is that real? No, but it's perception. And all of this comes back to perception. It all comes back to what is the perception of the industry. And so, Matt, as someone who wagers on sports regularly, it is not very hard for a sports book to profile a customer.
Yes.
Right? It's not very hard for them to know who's betting with them, often based on their betting action, but a lot of times as soon as they walk in the door, and they know who's there. And so we know what technology can do these days, right? It is not that hard to create a program that scrapes the names off NFL rosters, off NBA rosters, and puts them into a database somewhere within the bowels of your sports betting operation, and at least throws up an initial flag if you have a match, so that someone looks at it and just says, oh, who's that?
Right.
And then you might be able to just pass it right on, but you have to at least be looking at it. This isn't about education. It's about enforcement, and the books need to get on.
Yeah, I think that this is a big wake-up call. I would imagine that this is a high priority here moving forward, because stuff like this is just the little things that could really kind of shift perception of all of everything that we're doing here. Whenever we sit there and talk about all the positives and everything that of the legalized market, we got to make sure that we're staying on top of that stuff. Adam, take us home with the state roundup, my man.
Well, let's go to Kentucky. Kentucky has one of the more interesting legislatures in all of the United States. You have to know when it's an odd-numbered year versus when it's an even-numbered year. Now, we are in an even-numbered year. That means it's a 60-day session. That's pretty short. They're trying to get sports betting through for the 4th time. Not looking great at the moment. The House is in agreement for the most part, and it hasn't been the problem in the past. The problem's been in the Senate. Now, if it doesn't get through this year, you have to know that next year is an odd-numbered year. That means it's only a 30-day session, and you're going to need 3/5 of the legislature to pass a bill. For more anomalies like this, go check out our article, Legal Sports Report, right now, which will make you question a lot less why it's so hard to pass sports betting legislation in the United States. Minnesota is on the move. We cleared a couple of committees in Minnesota. There is a little bit of opposition building in Minnesota, and it goes back to something we don't talk about much, the charitable gaming industry, which according to some is a $3 billion industry in Minnesota. So moving, but not necessarily without problems in Minnesota. Missouri's having some committee hearings as well. We're moving along there. And hey, Maryland. Remember Maryland? Yes. They passed legal sports betting 18 months ago. And just yesterday, we finally got an approval for a study on whether we need to do more to include minorities and women in the ownership of businesses. Obviously, a cause that is worth the time. However, it has taken for the longest time to get this even going. So don't get your hopes up for Maryland anytime soon. The one other thing we need to mention before we get out of here, for those of you not on the video podcast, Dustin came wearing green on St. Patrick's Day. Adam came wearing green on St. Patrick's Day. Matthew?
I forgot today was St. Patrick's
Yeah.
Day. Oh, yeah, that's unfortunate.
Someone punch him. Someone punch him.
I'll e-punch myself there. I'm e-punching myself. I'll take all the e-punches and all the e-pinches and all the things like that with everything. Guys, everything we talk about here on the pod, you can find over at LegalSportsReport.com. Go in, take in the words, all the awesome work Adam and team are doing over there. Listen, really, really good follows on the Twitter machine as well, at Dustin Gowker, at Adam Candy, 2 E's, no Y. Don't even worry about following me. Go back to the scrub to the front if you need my Twitter handle on there. Subscribe, rate, and review, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google. We appreciate all of those as well. For Adam, for Dustin, I'm Matt. Talk to you guys next week.